Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest living here in Austin, Texas, and have had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. I hope you've been enjoying the podcast series that we've been doing. We're going to try to start something new. The archives are getting a little bit full, and we thought it might be a good idea from time to time to dip back into them and present you with something we're going to call the Golden Oldies. And they're episodes from different podcasts series that have been particularly well received or important. Just try that out. Give me a little break between recordings, and so usually our series run 5 or 6 or 8 in some cases, and then between them present a golden oldie. Dipping back, the one that I chose to get us started is an interview I did with Professor William Miller, and Miller is retired now from the University of New Mexico. He's a prolific author and scholar. He wrote a book called Quantum Change. For those of you who follow the series, you know that I'm very interested in psychic change, the transformation that happened to Bill Wilson. How does it happen to us in recovery? Because that seems to be the thing. If people can get a hold of that, wrap their arms around it, they get an understanding of what genuine transformation is. And that's what Carl Jung sent old Roland Hazard way back in the 30s to find, because that was what he thought would be his only hope for recovery from alcoholism. So very good interview, not so much on my part, but on Professor Miller's. So the whole series is available. It's around September, October of 2020. Let's welcome Professor Miller and hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for coming. God bless, and do keep coming back. I wonder if you could begin by telling us just a little bit about how this book of yours came about. I have a quote from you. You said this: "In my 35 years of research, this was the most fun I ever had with the study and the most uplifting." Something about working with alcoholics that we just either have fun or let's just go get drunk. So, tell us about it.
I've greatly enjoyed my work with addictions also, and stayed with that my whole career just because the outcomes are so good. But this one study just stands out for me. I kind of privately think it's the most important piece of work I did in my career. I got interested in the Ebenezer Scrooge kind of change. We love that Dickens story, of course, or it's a Wonderful Life, where something happens that changes the person permanently. But I got interested in whether that happens in real life. My daughter had such an experience that was quite striking, and I went off on sabbatical leave to Australia and found a group of colleagues who were interested both in psychology and spirituality. And we just began talking about if you were to try to study this, how would you do that? And the last psychologist I could find who really had studied and written about it was William James, a century ago, now more than a century ago. We decided that a study would simply be descriptive, and you can't very well randomly assign people to have such a change. And you can't put people into imaging machines and wait for them to have one. It's going to be retrospective. So you're going to find people who have had such an experience and have them describe it. That's exactly what James was doing. Some theologians like James Loder have been interested in this phenomenon over time, but not many psychologists. There are a few case studies here and there of these sudden, unexplained changes. One psychologist called it an exorcism, even though it was not an exorcism, but it was a very rapid change. The nature of them is that they're highly memorable. So people have a very clear memory of when this happened, long after it happened. They're hard to describe. People have a hard time finding the words to explain it. They're noetic in that sense. And they produce a permanent change. So unlike people that I've worked with in addictions, or at least most people, where they're trying to hang on with white knuckles and not go back to where they were before, people with a quantum change know they have gone through a one-way door. Bill W. talks about that with his own experience, that he knew he was free. Now, that's an unusual experience. And these experiences themselves often are quite unusual. We found that people don't talk about them very often. And if they do tell someone, often people look at them kind of strange because the stories can sound sort of crazy. We read some of them to a psychiatrist who didn't know what we were reading, and he said this person should be in the hospital right now. So they're usually misunderstood as pathology. And I think these are much more common than we ever imagined.
James talks about two varieties, and you mentioned this in your book as well, the educational variety and the sudden dramatic ones. Your interest was primarily in the second, but you advertised in the Albuquerque newspaper, as I recall, and that's how people came forward. You interviewed them at some length and found some very different experiences, but some things that were common to them as well. They were in pain. There was some turmoil going on. Some of them were in prayer when it happened.
1/3 of them were praying at the time that it happened.
Wilson was doing that in the hospital. It's odd if there is a God.
Yeah, that's right. Some of the people were praying that prayer that, God, if you're out there, this would be a good time.
I've never been this low.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So prayer was I think the most common thing that people were doing. It was still only about 1/3 of people. Maybe half of the people were in terrible distress. They were at the end of the rope, and then the rope broke, which was Bill W.'s experience. But interestingly, a substantial proportion of people were just going about their lives, just doing their ordinary daily life, like Ebenezer Scrooge was, just going home from work. Some of them were just sitting in the living room. One woman was cleaning a toilet. Another was sitting on a toilet when it happened, walking past his fireplace. So in the ordinariness of life, these also happen.
When you try to get inside the event, what did you encounter there that they were able to put into words?
Putting into words was a challenge, so that was a commonality. These folks knew that something unusual was happening to them. It didn't feel like something that they had experienced elsewhere. Often they have a discrete beginning, know that something unusual is happening. They last sometimes just for minutes or for a few hours. So they're not usually very long experiences, but highly memorable. No one had the experience of, I'm doing this myself.
Which brings in the human ego. Ego is temporarily suspended. It's now observing and present, but not in charge.
Yes. Yeah, they knew they were not in charge of this. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very good for us alcoholics.
Yeah, for all of us as human beings. Yeah. We thought we observed two types. One type was a classic mystical experience. William James' description of mystical experiences, of having a noetic experience that has a kind of beginning and an end, that you're not in charge of, and it's quite unusual. And very commonly a sense of unity or oneness with all of humankind or all of creation, all of the universe even. So those are common in mystical experience, but these mystical experiences produce permanent change, which most mystical experiences don't. The other kind we call the insight type. And for these folks, there weren't the common elements of a mystical experience, but they had the experience of a revelation, of something seeing something. Mm-hmm. And they said it was not like coming to a conclusion on their own. It was being shown something. So they had the experience of it coming from outside themselves.
And I think you said in your book that many of them saw this as the beginning of a process.
Yes.
An ongoing journey, maybe entry through a door into some new kind of relationship, let's say.
Mm-hmm. The first time we interviewed people, it had been on average 11 years since their experience. We did a 10-year follow-up. And what they reported was that the experience had continued. It had been the beginning of a journey that continued over time. A number of them had additional experiences of this kind, so additional mystical quantum change experiences over the course of the years, and they were changed people. We had a sense of being privileged to sit with them. I mean, these were transformed people in many ways, and the transformation continued. I mean, a lot of it happened right at the moment, but it also continued. We had people describe to us what their values were before the experience, and right after the experience, and then later in their life. Right after and later values were fairly similar, but the contrast with the values that they had before their experience was almost a complete flip-flop. Things that had been very low priority became very high priority, and things that had been terribly important dropped to the bottom of the values hierarchy. So it just turned things upside down. And interestingly, both men and women seemed to move away from sexual stereotypes of being classically feminine or classically masculine, to be more like each other. And a higher interest in things spiritual was a very common component. Not religious necessarily, but the spiritual dimension.
I wonder if you noticed any compartmentalization in their lives. In other words, that perhaps it touched this area, these areas, but there were some that really weren't touched. And I take Wilson, for example, wonderful writer, brilliant guy, all that good stuff. But there were certain things in his life that he never got a good hold on. He recovered from his alcoholism, but there were other addictions that continued to plague him. It wasn't like across the board, total become a saint. You know?
And it doesn't make everything all right. It doesn't remove adversity from your life. It seems to change how you experience your life and adversity.
Uh-huh.
And I must say, these people felt very safe. They just had a sense of peace and safety about them. And some of them now going into riskier situations, working in dangerous neighborhoods or with populations that you might think of as risky, but feeling very safe about it. So it's interesting. We asked them, now tell us what changed. And the almost immediate common answer was everything. But certainly there are areas of life that aren't changed or perfected. But the sense was of being a new person, a different person, rather biblical in that sense. Pauline.
Now, I may have misread this, but did you say in the book that there were some who had rather profound experiences and it didn't affect them at all? Or was it just those that had the insightful types that it didn't affect?
No, both insightful and mystical types.
Both of them
changes. They were very similar.
Yeah.
I probably did say that there are people who have mystical experiences and it doesn't change them. And in fact, that's probably the norm. But for some reason, these insights or these mystical experiences were a one-way door that changed these folks.
So that's part of your definition between a quantum change and a psychic change. Is that right? What you use different terminology there. We use psychic change usually in the recovery literature.
Not a term I've used, psychic change. But quantum change is this particular permanent, relatively sudden, highly memorable experience. My editor wanted me to add one more chapter to the book, which is how you too can have a quantum change.
Right.
And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that. We proposed 5 different possible explanations or accounts or understandings of what was happening. The last one of which was basically God did it. And
Right.
that's the one I favor, I must say, that these things seem to come from outside us and were acted upon. It's not the only possible way to think about what's happening, but it's my understanding of what's happening. And
Right.
I don't know how to do that.
Desperation is helpful, but not determinative.
And not necessary.
And not necessary. It doesn't have to be.
No, again, I'm about 40% or so of the people were just going about their lives And that is the Scrooge story. He's just going home from work on an ordinary day, and bam, this happens to him out of the blue like a lightning bolt. And we had people that definitely had that experience and didn't understand why it had happened to them. They were grateful for it.
Right.
They had a why me experience, not in the poor me, why me, but in the sense of why was I blessed in this way, or of all the people who were suffering in the way I had been, why was I so fortunate to have this experience?
Yeah, yeah. One of the quotes I took from your biography, I really liked it. You said you described yourself as that you've been living in the doorway, religion and psychology. And so what's that been like for you over the years?
Yeah. Well, in graduate school, I was told in no uncertain terms to keep quiet about my religion. This is almost a direct quote of our director of clinical training. If you have to believe that sort of thing, keep it to yourself.
Right.
So in that era in psychology, spirituality was kind of taboo. You could ask people about their sex lives, you could talk about their income, their family conflicts, but you never talked about their spirituality or religion. And there never was a good reason for that. William James was obviously one of the founders of American psychology, very interested in spiritual experiences, and his most famous book is on that topic. But somewhere around the 30s, 40s, 50s, psychology got very nervous about spirituality. And that's not proper scientific material, or you shouldn't be talking about that. Never with an explanation. And I think it has to do with the roots of psychology lying in philosophy and theology.
Yes.
I mean, we came out of that root in the 19th century. And like adolescence, I think we had to go through a period of saying, I am not like my parents. And then toward the end of the 20th century, psychology kind of came around to saying, maybe my parents knew something. And the American Psychological Association began publishing books on spirituality and religion. The field just kind of opened up. But I was much earlier than that in my own training and early career. And I did have that experience of I'm learning things in psychology that I think will be useful to pastors. So my wife and I wrote a book for pastors on things they might be able to use in counseling. And then also therapists, here are some things you might want to know about religion, because a very substantial proportion of the people that you're treating have religion as a significant part of their lives. And it's not something to be overlooked or ignored. And it's an important source of strength and coping. So it was that passing back and forth.
And all of them are spiritual.
Well, of course.
Whether you're not. And so how do you blend those two?
Spirituality is not something you have or don't have. I mean, it's like personality. I mean, there are lots of dimensions to it.
Right.
But it's a part of human nature.
Yeah, and AA has in some ways been a bit of a bridge between those two worlds. I've been in it since 72. I find that there are movements and things that happen within the recovery world that then happen within the more academic world, the clinical world. It's like we tested out a little bit. Some of the family systems a lot of it was done in the treatment field, or at least it made it popular. Spirituality versus religion. Maybe it had some of its major origins in AA, separating those two.
That separation would not have made sense to William James.
That's right.
When he's talking about varieties of religious experience, he's talking about spirituality. But we've come to the place of separating at least institutional religion from the spiritual dimension of human beings.
Right. My understanding, I could be wrong on this, was that spirituality was a word used much later in the vocabulary. When they were saying religion, like James, that it was understood that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
Any thoughts? I know you're not in recovery yourself, but regarding AA's future, because I know you've studied the field quite extensively. There's some of us who worry about AA become, and many 12-step programs becoming, well, kind of like what the church did. They become mechanical. They have a tendency towards fundamentalism. And you lose that transformational element. We replace meetings with, instead of meditation. You understand what I'm getting at?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Well, and you're right. The church did that too.
Yeah.
So you don't hear a lot about spirituality necessarily when you go to church. You hear dogma or self-help or stuff like that. I think that's probably a risk. But I kind of think AA is going to hang around for a very long time.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that.
Yes, yeah. I think there were two influences on AA that I think were not helpful. One was mandating people to go to AA meetings, as a legal requirement, and AA was never meant to be coerced. It's attraction, as you know. And the other was the treatment industry, calling itself 12-step treatment or disease model treatment, and doing things that I think are anathema to original Bill W. writings, at least. In that article I sent you that I wrote with Ernie Kurtz was trying to separate original AA from what it became in the treatment industry.
I feel crazy when I read studies where they're comparing cognitive behavioral therapy, et cetera, to AA. Well, AA is not a therapy.
No, it's not. You can compare it to 12-step facilitation therapy, which we did.
Yeah.
The 12-step facilitation therapy performed at least as well as motivational interviewing or cognitive behavior therapy. So it's now accepted as an evidence-based treatment, but that's not AA itself. It's a form of treatment.
So you're hopeful about the future?
I'm a pathological optimist.
With no intention of recovering from that, eh?
No desire to recover from that.
No,
it's a choice.
That's right.
Glass half full or half empty. You get to choose.
Yeah, but having spent so much time in the addiction field, do you think we have something to teach science and academia? Sam Shoemaker wrote a great article on what AA has to teach the church. I want to write one on the other end of things. Does the church have something to teach AA?
Well, that's passing back and forth. Sure.
That's right.
I mean, I think addiction is a wonderful model for sin. Where we get antsy about the concept of sin, but it biblically just means missing the target or not going down the right path. But addiction research is such a clear example of how you can get captured doing something self-destructive and destructive to others and have difficulty letting go of it. And that's biblical concept of sin.
That's right. And I'm separated. I'm alienated over here.
Yes. It's about separation.
Yes, and locked in with my whatever the substance or behavior might be.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work after a while.
Well, and substance dependence, at least from spiritual eyes, is putting something in God's place and giving something a central importance that really belongs to God.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets like that in advanced stages.
Right.
You sacrifice your relationships and your work and everything.
Your soul.
Yes.
What we're here to do.
And that's the root of psychology, because psyche, the Greek, is the soul. I said in the 20th century, psychology lost its soul and then lost its mind. And we got the mind back now pretty well with consciousness research, and we're getting back in touch with the soul.
Well, listen, I really want to thank you for your book. We've gone through it fairly extensively over the course of the last several episodes, and it's been a tremendous help kind of comparing and contrasting it with William James and what the impact is on our own spiritual lives and development as we participate in 12-step programs. So I want to thank you once again for coming by and joining us, and for the great work that you have done throughout your life in the addiction treatment field. Many thanks for all of that on behalf of millions.
Thanks very much, and glad to meet you.
Well, great to meet you. I saw when you were just starting your academic work, I was just starting my recovery work.
That's right. Yeah, about the same time. Yeah, 70, 72. Yeah, 71.
So anyway, thank you very much. Yeah, I want just a final word to our listeners. If you haven't done so, encourage you to go to our website, listen to Two-Way Prayer, put your ego aside for a moment and allow it to listen for God's voice in your mind. You've got an addict voice, you've got a critic voice. I think you might be surprised to find out that there's another voice in there if you'll only listen to it. And it's really wiser than the ego, and good for the ego to take the back seat for a while. So again, Professor Miller, thank you so much for coming by, and thank you all for joining us. God bless, and keep coming back.